Welcome to Forward Obsessed, where we talk to breakthrough business leaders and rising entrepreneurs about their journeys, origin stories, and aha moments. Hello and welcome to this episode of Forward Obsessed. I'm your co-host, David Salinas. Today's guest, Dr. Ranjit Bindra. He's a scientist who started multiple companies now, takes us through his background, his family, where he got his first exposures to entrepreneurship. He'd come from his father, who was a creator, and his mother, who was a scientist who would leave the science world to start an Oriental rug company and some real estate. He goes through getting his PhD, finding his passion for fighting cancer after his father would pass away. This is an incredible human who goes through the maturation of entrepreneurship, where he learns how to transition from science to pitching a company, from pitching a company to raising capital, to failing, and then ultimately to raising additional capital for new companies and starting new businesses, which he now runs 4 companies. This is a great one, folks. We want you to strap in and enjoy the show. Be sure to like and follow us, subscribe on the channels that you use, and thank you very much, and stay forward obsessed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of Forward Obsessed. I'm joined here by my co-host, Peter Senna. I am David Salinas, and we have with us co-founder and acting CEO of Modifi Bio, Dr. Ranjit Bindra. I got that right? And he joins us today here from New Haven.
Yes.
All right. Let's get right into it. What we like to do is we like to go back to the early years, right? Entrepreneurs tend to have exposure to entrepreneurship. I'd love to hear a little bit about your history, your life growing up, and where that exposure might have come from.
Yeah, great. No, it's really wonderful to be on the show. So I'm actually a Connecticut native. So I grew up in Groton, Connecticut, so sub-based capital of the world. I'm part of a Pfizer family. I'm one of the few people in my family that didn't go to Pfizer. My dad, mom and dad were immigrants. Came here in 1969. My father, they met in doing their chemistry graduate work in India, and they actually came to do their postdocs together in the Midwest in the late 60s. And it's sort of that classic story. You know, they had $5 in their pocket. They were the first people to kind of come out here from India. And, you know, they were doing experiments one day in the lab and stopped over at the courthouse and got married and then went back to work. And so that kind of immigrant mindset has always kind of been, in our home and our lives. Even when I was a child, my mom, she left, probably one of the first signs of entrepreneurship, if there was a gene that you could clone. She left after writing a book with my dad on prostaglandin synthesis. She just opened up an Oriental rug shop and just sort of left chemistry altogether. And so I got to kind of watch her build a building, get all these staff, get rugs from India. We'd go with them to India and pick the rugs out at the looms and bring them back. And I was sort of part of that family business. And then very entrepreneurial in their own right, bought some apartment buildings and would watch them as a child kind of buy these apartments and rent them out and answer those phone calls late at night. Heating and plumbing's not working. But myself, I just, was a very quiet, kept to myself child, just riding around on my bike down by Eastern Point Beach, trying to make little boats out of styrofoam and at the Spicers Marina. I would spend a lot of time doing that, and something that we'll probably get to is, which I've realized as I've self-reflected in preparation for this, that got really into electronics, and so building things. But remember, this is Radio Shack days, no Google, no internet. This is just go to Radio Shack and get a little pamphlet on how to build a circuit.
Radio Shack and hack.
Yeah, exactly. Not exactly like the most, your friends kind of didn't think of you as that cool when you're making a bike ride to Radio Shack.
Rest in peace, Radio Shack. Now they're trying to do a crypto research into the Shack.
Don't
get me started. I'm going to sound off. So
no, it's wild, and I think we'll probably get to that, because I would spend many a days just trying to figure out how to build circuits, and and I loved it because I could just do it all myself, and I could work as much as I wanted, as little as I wanted. I didn't have anyone telling me what to do, and I wasn't the best electrical engineer, but certainly was a formative time for me. But that's sort of I think we could probably start there, was sort of a reflection of sort of what I was doing in the early years.
Yeah. You ever ask your mom why she left chemistry to start a Oriental rug shop?
Yeah, it's funny. My parents are fascinating people. My dad's not with us, which we'll certainly get to later. But my dad was a brilliant creative scientist. He would work at Pfizer during the day in the chemistry lab, and then we'd be down. The two of us would be having these petri dishes. He had this idea that if you can make a gel matrix and put grass seeds in it, the birds wouldn't eat it. Now, I'm not sure that ever got commercialized, but like you could see the grass coming through the gelatin, and that the idea would be you could market this as a product so that the animals and birds wouldn't eat it. So he would do brilliant chemist, very creative mind, and then at night would do these projects when I would sort of be his assistant. But he wasn't particularly good at managing people. He sort of was a very emotional person, so creative. If you didn't get something, if you weren't at his level, he would just get very frustrated and not want to talk to you anymore. My mom, on the other hand, was really good at managing people, setting up contractors. She's about my height. She's a shorter human. And so she'd have, 6'3" contractors all circled around her. And she'd be like, well, no, you need to build the ceiling tile. You need to cut 10% discount here. And she'd kind of know how to kind of manage people. And I think that led her into that sort of entrepreneurial, even though it's not biotech, but business building in her own right.
Wow.
I want to unpack something you said about your dad, which was you described him as a creative scientist. Yeah. I'm a firm believer that any scientist is, ripe with creativity. Though I know a lot of scientists. I mean, I'm sitting in front of one right now, and they don't often refer to themselves as creative. Why did you describe your dad as a creative scientist, and what makes a creative scientist? I know the audience would love to hear that.
That's a really good question, actually. And I was just, we have our weekly radiation biology seminar series, and I was just thinking about creativity in science. And at the core, I think science is a very interesting job because they're very specific. Like, let's just think about, I'll just say real estate. Like, there's a very specific set of things that you do to sell a house and commissions and whatnot. And I think if you talk to really good real estate agents, they'd tell you there's actually like an art behind all of that of what you do. It's not just getting the commission. It's not just how you set up the house. It's the networking, the connections. Science is actually very similar in that especially in this day and age, there are very specific protocols to do things in the laboratory. So let's just say you want to look at a protein. We now understand very specifically how to purify that protein, how to order a kit to, study that protein's function, and then how to model it in an animal. And that's all very textbook. And you can print out all the papers you want in the world, and you can take all the classes you want in the world. But when you start digesting that information as a scaffold and start getting very creative about asking questions that either no one else is thinking about, no one else cares about, but you personally think they're important. And many of our lab's greatest discoveries have been rife with grant reviewers and colleagues and other folks in the community telling us we're doing the wrong thing. This is super boring. You should do what we're doing because what we're doing is what everyone else is doing in science. And so I think in creativity in science is actually looking at problems. You've got some tools, and then just sitting down and saying, well, I think this is the way that we should do it. And even if everyone else says you're totally wrong, you just keep doing it. And it may be years that you work on a problem. We'll tell you about Modifi Bio later today. It was based on a clinical discovery of a patient that I saw one day in clinic who was getting a drug called temozolomide, which we'll also get to later, who was resistant to the drug. And this is 2018. I'm sitting in clinic. I've got some med students, some residents, people around me, and I'm just looking at this patient's scan. I'm like, geez, you're getting this drug and you're not responding to therapy. And I took that clinical question and brought it back to our laboratory and posed it to a postdoc. I called up a chemist, Seth Herzon, on Science Hill, and I said, hey, can you help me with this? I'm not a chemist. My dad was a chemist. My mom was a chemist. She owns a rug store. So, but clinically, this is a problem, and can we make a different molecule that'll do this? It'll overcome the resistance mechanism. 2018, we started that project, and I apologize, we're a little off topic, but it's relevant. Sure. And over 2-3 years, we had 1 or 2 postdocs that tried to solve this problem with us. Like they couldn't do it, and it wasn't their fault necessarily, but the reagents weren't there. It was the right place at the right time. They just didn't have the mindset, and many people would give up on the project, but Seth and I just kept hammering away at this every year. No, there's got to be a way to make a molecule. And then a 23-year-old kid named Kingston Lin, BSMS from Penn, who a wonderful immigrant story, raised by a single mom, first kid to go to college. Brilliant chemist, says, hey, Ranji, I saw one of your talks and I'm a MD PhD student and I want to do a project that's a mix of chemistry and cancer biology. And we had the last postdoc had just sort of left. And I said, here's the problem. Can you solve it? And literally over the next year or two, he solved it. I mean, it was unbelievable. And again, it was that creativity because he was thinking about things in a completely different way and ignoring what everyone else was telling him to do, including us. And we'd tell him, don't do that experiment. And he would do it anyways. And then we suddenly realized that, that was actually the right thing to do. So I'm not sure that fully answered your question.
No, it does. And
I'm fascinated by that.
No, I'm fascinated by the conversation too. It's so what I always like to say, and I want to kind of hear if this occurs to you as well, is new questions unlock new possibilities. And a lot of times people ask the same questions and the same questions lead to the same answers, right? Yeah. Sounds like your dad, going back to, the gelatin with the grass experiment or the things when you were the loyal assistant early on, sounds like your dad asked a lot of new questions and that's where the creative scientist in him happened. Is that fair?
100%. And what happened was, the pharmaceutical company worked with wonderful company. And this is what I love about the startup world and biotech is he was asking questions that people didn't want him to ask or people didn't want him to think of it because everyone had a very specific box that he needed to be in. And I feel
or agenda.
What's that? Or agenda. And a political agenda because of their own, biases and where they want to go in their career. And in pharma, I always wish that he had gotten a chance to be in academia, but there's no way he could last as a professor back then as a first generation. It just wasn't a good fit. Whereas in academia and the early startup world, you can sort of do those things exactly, which is just ask these questions that are totally out of the box. And one thing I'll add to this is it just reminded me from even what we were talking about before we started was science is fascinating to me because it's not. You can't see it in front of you. So with my mentor in grad school, my MD PhD mentor, Peter Glazer, chair of radiation oncology, he was just at this meeting earlier. I would go into his office and we'd talk about the progress I had on a project, which was studying a gene promoter and how it got turned on and off. But I always thought it was fascinating that it's almost like talking about something that's like up on the moon that we can't see. And Peter would say, hey, Ranji, so what'd you find today? And I was like, well, I think this CPG island isn't methylated. He's like, well, have you thought about it this way? Well, maybe we should do this. And we'd solve a problem about something that's on the moon that we can't actually ever see. And I still, to this day, look at my thesis. I will never see that promoter. I will never see the promoter of that gene because it's 1/1,000,000th the head of a pin inside the nucleus of DNA. I'll never know if I was right. I mean, it stands the test of time because people validated our work. But again, because of that, it requires immense creativity and the ability to not let people steer you the wrong direction.
Are there different types of personas when it comes to scientists, like a creative scientist? What would other ones
Yeah.
be?
So as a drummer, so that side piece has been playing drums since the 5th grade. Still trying to quit my day job. Hasn't happened yet, but I still think I have a chance. What
band would you be on? If you could be in any band, which would it be?
I probably like a good funk band,
Okay.
I think, or Wilco. I think Wilco would be a cool band, But there's many bands. I just love music, and there are many parallels to rock and roll and science because each lab and each biotech, it has a culture. Okay. And for a sidebar again, people ask me, well, Ranji, you got 4 companies. Why don't you meld them all into one? And I said, well, if you like U2 and you like Michael Jackson, like Wilco, would you want them all in the same band? And they're absolutely not, because each one has a style and a culture and a philosophy of the way that entity is. And so in terms of bringing it back to rock and roll and your question, there are all sorts of scientific persona. There are some people that are like, I like to call them the drum teachers. So they're like really good. They never made it to be on tour, but they're really good, technically good. They can do that Western blot. They can do those experiments, but they just weren't creative enough to form that band that got that hit album, right? And those scientists, you can see them that they publish in decent impact journals. We call these sort of medium tier journals. And then you've got these folks that are just looking for sort of one hit wonders because and this is no fault to any of these people, they just want that public sort of recognition. I want that science paper. I want the press release. And then you've got other folks that are just sort of master political players that are just kind of collaborating. They just kind of want to have their fingers in a little bit of everything. Then there's some people that are just obsessed with one problem, right? And they just want to solve it at all costs. I could, go into many, many other different persona, but it is a very fascinating. The world of science is such a unique culture that's just different from anything else I've seen.
I think we're going to come back to that later on in your career. One other question I had is, what you described is, I have a little bit of a pet peeve when someone says that's the way it's always been done, right? Sort of that you don't want to go down there. That doesn't make sense. This is the way we're working on it. It's almost like an indicator for me, like I need to look deeper.
Yeah, it's like the pat on the head, like, we always do it
exactly.
this way.
We had a guest on. Exactly. And then we had a guest on that you know really well, Kevin Rakin.
Yeah.
And we got into a little bit about this concept of a founder that's delusional, and where fraud comes in and all this kind of stuff. Where does the line get drawn between
vision and hallucination?
Yeah, between or creativity and research and sort of trying to find a way for a couple of years, as you described, and delusion in your mind. Like have you figured that out, or is it just like?
Yeah, and it's interesting. So with Modifi Bio, which is the Kingston Lin story and the Seth Herzon, it's funny you mentioned that, because in 2018, when we started the project, we made no traction, and we even submitted a few grants to the NIH, and one reviewer just said, "You guys are like never." They said this is never going to work, and which was particularly frustrating, because our lab's very well funded, and this person just kind of ripped into us and had an essay long reason why this would never work. And I just didn't care. I just kept throwing resources. I just kept writing other grants, finding other ways to fund the project. And you get to a point, in particular when we made the first molecule, first you got to figure out if this thing is actually real. And again, this thing's on the moon. You can't see it. No one's going to pick up the phone and say, it's almost like when someone gets convicted, and they're still not guilty, but the jury convicts them. Well, you never know. Is it true or not? Same thing here is we weren't sure if we were going to understand the mechanism of action of the new drug that we created. And we'd have these like every 2 to 3 weeks, we'd have these, we called them the chameleon compound meetings, because at the time, the secret code name for the project was the Chameleon Project. And people, and I have about a 20-person lab, people wanted to be on the Chameleon Project. They knew about it, and other labs say, "Hey, what's going on with this Chameleon Project? We can't talk about it."
Sounds like a Marvel movie.
Yeah, it was wild. And we'd have these and the neat, and this indirectly gets to the question of delusional and whatnot, is the Herzon Laboratory and some other groups, we would then all get on these calls together and just start staring at this data. And it was almost a way so that like people like guiding through the wilderness, so that we all didn't lose our minds. Because there was one point in 2021 or 2020, right before we made the big break in the case, where I called up Seth Herzon. I said, the trainees, I admitted this to them over drinks at a conference last week. I actually called Seth and I said, I don't think we're going to solve this problem. I actually think I'm losing my mind on this, because I've been doing DNA repair research for 20 years, and I can't figure out the mechanism of how this drug is actually killing these cells. And if we don't know the mechanism, we can't spin this out into a therapeutic and obviously start a company. One thing I'll mention, if folks that are listening know about PARP inhibitors, a great famous story, there are drugs like olaparib, telazapirib, rucaparib. These are FDA-approved PARP inhibitors. One of them was developed by Len Post called telazapirib. And this was actually, bringing it back to the biotech entrepreneurship, same idea. Len Post had started a company called Lead Therapeutics. This is back in the days when WuXi and China CROs, they didn't exist. And he said, my idea is I'm going to contract out all the chemistry to China, okay? And I'm just going to have a virtual company that's in California, and there's going to be 3 or 4 of us, and a couple good chemists, and we're just going to do this. And literally everyone says, it's never going to work. How could you have your chemistry being done in China where you don't know who's going to steal your molecules and who's going to steal intellectual property? Long story short is Lead Therapeutics developed a PARP inhibitor that was better than anyone out there, and they didn't know how it worked. And he spent 2 to 3 years working on this, and his whole team even told him, he's the chief scientific officer, he said, we have to drop this project, it's not going to work. But again, and kind of say, you're delusional to him. And he sort of stuck to his guns and just kept hammering away at this problem. Eventually figured out that it was something called PARP trapping was the mechanisms, and some of the cancer oriented folks will know what that means. But he finally figured that out, was PARP trapping. and was able to turn that into a multi-billion-dollar company. So I think the best short answer is bringing a team of trusted collaborators around you so you can call them up. Because, Seth, kind of got me through said rounds. He'd been doing this 5 more years longer than me. So let's just keep pushing forward. And sure enough, another person came on and solved the problem, found the mechanism, and then we published the paper in Science. It was like one of the best projects ever.
So take me back for 1 second. You make that call and he goes, you know what, Ranjit, let's throw in the towel. Would you have done it at that point if he wasn't in?
I think it'd be 50-50. I think I'd be depressed. I think part of entrepreneurship is a baseline level of OCD. My college roommate at Yale says I have a rare mix of undiagnosed OCD and ADHD. And it's sort of this
takes one to know one.
Right?
You're in that room.
Yeah, right. And it's this ability to, and it's great what you just said, or what you both said earlier, is it's a fine line between creativity, obsession, and just like art. And when you think about artistic ideas, and you're right on the edge of just insanity, because to go that far out, and not get lost and come back, it's threading the needle. And so, I think even if he said no, it would have set us back a year or two. But I just couldn't stop thinking about it every single week. And then when we figured out that molecule, I was just at peace. But of course, there's going to be a new problem that's going to come up. We're going to solve that too.
So, your passion for science is infectious. I'm just loving this conversation. I want to take us back a little bit. Where did it come from?
Interesting. So, my interest in cancer research, and I'll lay some of these things out, and we'll see which way we want to go. Was shaped a lot by the loss of my father in medical school, and that was very difficult. I think unfortunately in the sixth to eighth grade time of my life, I was just a very quiet kid, just biking around Groton, Connecticut, floating those boats and going to the Spicer Marina, finding like quarters under my parents' cushions in their bedroom, and then buying Skittles and stuff like that. And that's like all I did. And then in high school, started to realize, someone showed me a chemistry book, and I was at this boarding school called the Taft School. And on Saturdays, there was a guy named David Hostage, a chemistry teacher, and he kind of saw that I had a special interest, and so he and I would meet on Saturday afternoons and do all the problems in the back of the book, and we just sit there and talk about chemistry and whatnot. And then in college, I kind of started getting into music. So I was in this big band called Party of the Righteous and Ska and Bones. Very, very intense rehearsal schedule. I'm sure that's not the best role model. You go to Ivy League school and you spend all your time playing a band. But I was in molecular biophysics and biochemistry major. Was doing my thing and studying. And then I went, last minute kind of applied to medical school, because again I realized I wasn't going to become a rock star by senior year.
Did you have long hair?
I didn't have. I tried to, but it didn't grow down. It grew out.
Oh, okay.
And it just didn't look good. Oh yeah. It was not pretty.
I was just trying to imagine you like that.
Yeah. I still wish I tried. I
had the same issue. Not anymore, it's a bummer. My hair grows up.
If you ever see Mark Saltzman, he's one of my co-founders of my other company. He's a founding chair of bioengineering here. He's got this beautiful long blonde hair. He drives a motorcycle. He's another guy you should bring on here sometime. Sure. But fast forwarding, it wasn't until, so I applied to med school last minute, got rejected from all of my programs. Pretty embarrassing, humiliating moment. Went into healthcare consulting in DC for 6 months. Did not like that because it wasn't a start. That's when I started to realize I really love science and creativity and the quest for knowledge. Then I went to the NIH and worked at the NCI. The NCI director had a very small lab, and through a friend of a friend, I got in there. And that was the moment that the MD, PhD physician scientist, interest in therapeutic development, I was working in the laboratory like nonstop, the evenings, weekends, just listening to crazy music with a bunch of fellow med-onc fellows and whatnot. And I was doing Western blots and studying cell lines with a disease called von Hippel-Lindau, which is it's a tumor suppressor gene. And a urologic oncologist comes in one day, Marcin Linehan. He says, "Hey, Ranji, you ever want to see a patient that has that cell line came from?" I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And it just realized that I was culturing cells that actually came from a patient that had cancer, who I then went into his clinic, and I got to meet these patients. And I suddenly realized that, and this person was just very stressed out. They had a hereditary disease. They wanted to know, how much, were they going to have another cancer in their kidney? Could they have children? And it was just this rude awakening to life that, like, gosh, people might get cancer and die. And wait a minute, I'm doing work in the laboratory that could actually affect this person. And that was the beginning when I was like, okay, I want to do some sort of physician scientist track. I want to see patients and make them feel that they're going to be okay. And I've spent, and we'll get to this maybe later, I focus on adult and pediatric brain tumor patients. And it's been very difficult, but I want to be there for them. But I want to do lab research as well. And then it was during my MD PhD when the first year that I started my PhD training, my father, who was always a guiding light, when I didn't get into medical school, he said, just keep moving, just keep pushing forward, this sort of immigrant mentality. He brought me through every major, inflection point in my life. And he got metastatic esophageal cancer. And it was the first year of graduate school. And long story short, and we certainly come back to that, but it was the weirdest graduate experience, because as I learned more about cancer and learned more about treating patients, my dad got sicker and sicker and sicker. And literally probably 3 months before my MD PhD program, he died. And it was terrible.
Yeah, that's deep. Was he proud of you?
He was. One of the last things he said was, he was like, you need to solve this disease. And I think that that really galvanized my interest because, not to sound cliche, but, the entire code of life, right, is 4 bases, A, T, G, and C. Everything in life is 4 bases. All species that we know of have these 4 bases. And those proteins, DNA creates the RNA. The RNA creates the protein. Proteins then modify themselves. They modify the DNA, and that's actually Modifi Bio is based on going back to the DNA, which means fundamentally these are solvable problems, right? And it's almost like, and hopefully this isn't too out there, but it's like chess. I mean, if you think about it, it's not an infinite number of moves. We still don't, to my knowledge, and someone can email me later and be like, you idiot, you didn't read this paper. But right now, I think the number of moves has not been calculated yet because there's just no computer that can do it. But there are a finite number of moves, right? And so I'm the eternal optimist when it comes to things like cancer, because if someone told me, I want you to start your lab on love, personally, just from my own, life, not easy to figure those things out. And there actually may never be a formula to figure out love, right? But in science, cancer, we can likely cure this disease, even though it's many diseases, and we've seen it. We've seen immunotherapy take patients with metastatic melanoma with 2 years to live, 6 months to live, that are 20 years out. Mm-hmm. And so that really sort of has galvanized me a little bit, indirect to your original question, to kind of do what we do. And again, I think the startup world is the way to get that done. Yeah.
I want to move on, but before I do, I have a question.
Yeah.
Cancer was never in my life. It didn't have a big impact on me. I didn't know a ton of people with it, and then all of a sudden it hit hard. My brother got it and lost his life. My father just literally a month ago. Not being a scientist, there's going to be a lot of listeners here that I think have been touched by cancer in some way, especially lately. It feels like it's coming more and more into everybody's life. It could be an age thing. It could just be an environmental thing. Who knows? How do people join the fight in other ways?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And how can you be involved without being in the laboratory and whatnot? Yeah, I was just on the on a Zoom with a good friend, mentor, a guy named Irv Adler, and I think he'll be okay with me mentioning his name. But Irv was the former head of PR and IR for Alexion, and he's an example of someone that was not a scientist. And we meet about every month. He helps me on biotech stuff. He helps me on he's an older guy in his 60s that's just walked on this planet and helps me understand human interactions and how to start a company and deal with all the things that you and we've all dealt with, right? Sure. In a startup life. And he had a family member that had pancreas cancer, and he ended up getting involved with the pancreatic cancer, the PanCan network. He's very much involved. He's semi-retired and spends a lot of time on that. And similarly, I work with a lot of foundations, the National Brain Tumor Society, Cure Search Foundation, PNOC, to name a few. And these foundations are fascinating to me because they're filled with people that could do jobs anywhere else, but have chosen to do this sort of philanthropy, sort of foundation-based. And a lot of these people will volunteer their time and whatnot. And that's a huge shout out that, the war on cancer isn't just infantry people like the postdocs and stuff going on the ground and, trying to win that battle at the bench. The war on cancer is multifaceted. It's just like World War II, where there's all sorts of people involved in all sorts of the front. And you can get involved by calling up some of these foundations and saying, I'd love to help, because these people actually need help to get that awareness out. And the last thing I'll mention on that is, I do a lot of curbside consults just because I do so much work on brain tumors, and I'm always happy to talk to friends of friends. And it is fascinating because what happens is people live their lives and they think of cancer. I was just talking to Irv about this. It's sort of this thing that they hope they don't get. And then when they have a family member or someone gets it, their entire world crashes down. Everything. The music stops, and they realize that they are one of those people. And that's what's been fascinating as a physician scientist myself, because I'm just waiting to get cancer because I've just been so exposed to it. And it is a fascinating experience to watch people's perspective and lives change when they get hit with that, if that makes sense.
Definitely had a huge impact on me and my family for sure. Yeah. My brother had pancreatic cancer, 43 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Took him quick too. I mean, they thought it was going to be like 3 to 5 months. Turned out he fought for 13 months, but
it's just
inoperable.
Yeah, it's a great example of a disease that it can be solvable with enough resources and enough minds on it. It's just a matter of time. I'm a huge optimist on that front, but yeah.
People said to me that the biggest problem with a cancer like that is that it's typically they don't know until it's too late, and it's so fast that a lot of people won't take on the problem because of the fact that you don't have enough time to research it and the person's gone.
Yeah, and funding and lots of funding constraints, and the tumor microenvironment is thought to be sort of not permissive for drug delivery and whatnot. And it is fascinating to me. But I think there's going to be new developments in that area. We were just talking about the PanCan network and some of the new things that are coming out.
Yeah, that's great. We'll put all these in the show notes for people that are watching or listening so that they can get involved for sure. I appreciate you.
Definitely.
Appreciate that. So now we're going to move into we've touched in your entrepreneurial endeavors, but we're going to get a little bit more granular now. We're going to start with Helix.
Yeah.
Okay, so in 2005, you co-found Helix. This was a pivot for you. You were coming out of research now and going into a company.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
If I remember correctly, you sort of stumbled into this with this whole concept of a pitch, right?
Yes. Yeah. It was fascinating. So Peter Glazer, I had just graduated. I did my PhD. I was very lucky. I was able to do it in 2.5 years, just because I got maybe too obsessed with my project and then ended up publishing a bunch of papers. Then I was like, okay, what do I do now? And I was just hanging out in the lab for about 6 months, just kind of playing around with scientific questions, kind of like, the young drummer still hadn't really learned how to do a show, like, now as a PI, different. And he walked by one day with a little thumb drive and he said, I got to do this pitch for this company called Helix, and it's based on some gene targeting technology from these postdocs in the other corner of the laboratory. And I can't make it. Can you do it for me? And I said, I said, well, what's a pitch? What do you mean? And then I was like, well, what is a biotech? I don't even know what that is, right? And then I suddenly realized that you just think of Pfizer, or you think about all these things, but there's actually startups that need to get money to bring in an idea from the laboratory into a company and eventually into a clinic. So long story short is that my buddy Eric Golding, he's at the business school, he's an MD MBA. I call him up and he's like, "You're an idiot. We don't know what the pitch is." And I said, "Well, will you do it with me?" So we go and we do this pitch, and we go to the Yale Entrepreneurship Society. It was the Y50K competition, if you guys remember the early 2000s. And I still remember we do this pitch. not particularly good at it. And then I think it was the BioRelics folks came in. It's like literally like men in suits or whatever, men in black, like or whatever, like 10 people come in suits and just school us. I mean,
fully orchestrated.
This is like an orchestra band, like in like, a symphony performance. And I'm just watching these guys, milestones. Here's the milestones of value inflection points and the A round crossover. This is when it's all projected. Totally did not even get mentioned. Didn't even make like last place probably, and got obsessed. So again, I have an obsessive personality where suddenly I was like, oh my God, I got to look into this. And
what was it?
It was
Are you competitive?
No, I've got very competitive, but never want to be competitive to hurt anyone else. But I'm like, wait a minute, I can do this. Yeah, I can do this. It's like my Indian mom coming out, who's like, you can't fail at anything. So I just went back and started method acting. I mean, I started back then. It's hard, right? We didn't have like Google. It was like Yahoo search engines. It was sort of like talking to friends and whatnot. So we came back the next year and just had a very, very polished pitch. Ended up winning the first place competition. It was like $10,000 or something like that. The Yale OCR, now Yale Ventures, introduced us to a guy named Kevin Reagan. Kevin walked in and, he had just come, I believe he was coming off a stint from Genaissance as CEO then. And then we'd assembled a team and it was actually amazing. We started this company, raised a couple $1 million. Kanan was one of our first investors.
Tim Shannon. That was his first deal?
That was his first deal.
Wow.
Tim Shannon's first deal. And, there I learned the importance of people and focusing on hyper obsessed about, every step of the path of as I'm sure the cliche phrase, which I still believe is building the plane while it's flying. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's right. I mean, and in that situation, I got kind of like, and I'll just be very open and I just got kind of more obsessed with showing everyone that I was like flying this airplane. I was like, oh, check this out. Cause I wanted like all my friends to see that I was like starting up a company and less so, and then more on, well, why aren't I a member of the SAB? I remember I got very obsessed with the fact that I wasn't a member of the scientific advisory board, making a big stink about I didn't get the recognition I deserve. And those are all the things in entrepreneurship I think that you have to avoid. You have to actually just focus on, do I have the right team working on this problem? What are my backups? What if this doesn't work? Not this has to work. Well, what if this doesn't work? What's my actual backup plan? And what does that look like? And so long story short, the company lasted a few years. We just didn't have the right people. The technology was too immature. At the end of the day, we just had to kind of call it quits. But I learned immensely. It sort of was a setup as I went into the next companies. I learned a lot of lessons there.
I want to take us back for a second because something that David and I have been doing for a long time is helping people tell their story. And we believe that how you tell your story, that's your strategy, right? Yeah. And it makes a difference between winning and losing. We've heard just a tweak to a pitch that we've helped people make has made the difference between not raising funding and raising lots of funding. So you get your butt kicked in the first pitch, the suits come in, the men in black team like you described, and you come back around, your determination, that immigrant mindset you told us about really fuels you to come back around. Yeah. And the creative scientist probably kicked in. You probably said, okay, what makes for a winning pitch?
Yes.
And so break it down for us, break it down for the folks watching. What makes a winning pitch? And if you were sort of back in that seat again, just coming off that loss, chasing the win, take us through that. Because I think it's really, really important for people to understand. You said method acting was one thing I'm gonna touch on, but what makes a great pitch? And be as universal as you can. Obviously, it's different for different industries. And take us through what's that inner monologue.
Beautiful. No, great question. So the first thing about a pitch is just like all of life is you will always be working on a better pitch. Like one thing is I'm actually fascinated across my 4 companies, Modifi in particular, gotten exposed to some very successful, famous scientists that started companies that have looked at my pitches and been like, this slide needs to be like this, this like needs to be like this. For the scientists in the room that are listening, one of the biggest problems is an academic grant or a presentation that we give a grant rounds on is the exact opposite of what venture pitch is. You need to, in a pitch, flip it around and understand what do your investors have, in my opinion, a bunch of boxes that they want to have ticked off.
Total addressable market.
Yeah. What's the market size? What's your team? What's your milestones? What's your burn rate? What's your strategy? Rather than just obsessively getting the investors to be interested in what you think is interesting. It's the other way around of you're marketing. You're selling a product to a consumer in a weird way. And so I think a lot of it boils down to understanding that a lot of the questions and things that you think are the most important are not what the investors are thinking. And so often I've had to step back and realize, and I still do this now, it's just overhauling one of Modifi's pitch decks. And I was like, from a year ago, I was like, why the heck was I obsessed about showing them this? Oh, well, that's because I thought it was an interesting scientific problem. I don't really care. People want to, they want a return on their investment.
Yeah, whiffy, what's in it for me?
Yeah, exactly.
I also think this, I was actually just modifying a deck, no pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was modifying a deck half an hour before this show. And I think that something else that happens is during that process of modifying it and updating it, the business evolves because as you put it down, it changes for you. You see new avenues.
It's an organism. Changes.
Things illuminate new categories, new alleyways, and you go down those things and you come back. And then just now, I just said to one of my colleagues, I said the pitch doesn't match the deck anymore.
Yeah,
and I said we have to update the deck.
That just happened to us. So yeah, because and we might get to this later, but part of this building while the plane is flying is realizing that like parts are going to fall off in different spots. You're going to need to jerry rig things, and you're just flying by the seat of your pants. And the same thing here is we've had to pivot on some of our priorities based on some of our recent data, and that's exactly our interim CSO, a guy named Mike Dillon. He's the founding CSO of a company called IDEA, and he's been senior scientific advisory board member of Modifi. But literally, we were going over the deck, and he turned to me and he said, the deck doesn't match the pitch anymore. And then we just sat there, and there's something and that's one of the other pieces of advice is find people that have done this before and listen to them and get their pitch decks. And just I literally will take pitch decks in no illegal way, just that have been given to me, and I'll start modeling my slides off them. He's like, oh, now I see this person's really making this flow so much better. But again, the living organism of a pitch deck, I've got like 17 different versions that keep evolving. Like I'd say every 2 weeks or so.
Yeah,
That's a great point.
Yeah. So you hire someone on your team, let's say, and you want to task this very important outcome to them, which is to create a great pitch deck. Mm-hmm. And let's say that you and your wife are going to a special concert on an island somewhere, and this person looks at you and says, well, I don't know anything about making a pitch deck. Where do I go to learn? What are some things to do? Yeah. You've got 5 minutes to brief them before hopping on an airplane and going off to the island, and then they have to do it without you.
Yeah.
What do you tell them?
Great question. One of the things I've been doing recently is realizing that corporate pitch decks for some of these biotechs are available. And I think pulling some of those out, like I'll pull out the IDEA, Repair, and Tango. These are for the biotech oncology focused ones. I think pulling out some of those pitch decks and realizing that even though that's a publicly traded company, like those decks kind of still follow the same philosophy and mantra because they are trying to get investors, in this case, the public markets, to invest, right? They're not just trying to show off. They're trying to, and when you look at and then get pitch decks from friends of friends, because again, even something as simple as the team slide, like I remember my early pitch decks, I was like, oh, well, I have these number of papers and I see these numbers of patients or I do. They don't want to know that. They want to know, for instance, your track record. This is, I was talking to an investor the other day. They want to know, have you done this before? What are the companies you've done? And talk about those things to give that investor comfort that they've got, they can put in the S&P and get 7%, but they can put in you and get 30% over 5 years or something like that. But yeah.
I love that. No, that's great. Yeah, the two of my favorite things that I think really make for a pitch is one is the famous sort of Sequoia venture capital pitch deck, which I think applies to every industry, and it's online. You can get on slide deck and put it in the show notes. And the second thing is Pixar. And in my opinion, if you take the shape of stories, and there's like 5 or 6, just like the 4 DNA, take the shape of basic stories and you combine that with a Sequoia structure and some great inspiration, and that's just been what's worked for me. And it's so funny. Who knows the most about storytelling? It's Pixar.
That's interesting. I love that idea. And actually, now you've reminded me that a Twitter, assuming it survives, Twitter is a really good resource. I want to call out Sarah Naeem. She was a former NEA Capital, now at a fund called Avoro, but she runs an independent Twitter feed that's not associated with work. And she actually, this gets back to your question, a good resource. She will actually give these amazing sort of, if you're pitching it to a new co in a Series A, these are the things to avoid. These are things not to say. These are the diligence questions. And there are a bunch of people like this to follow because they will actually give you advice from the investor seat and saying, here's what not to do and here's what to do. But yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's a big one. What you put in the deck will come out in the diligence, right? I learned that. I went through my first due diligence process. I was like, where are you getting these questions from? I don't understand. Like, you're really annoying the shit out of me. It was this woman. She was like so detailed and so specific. And she was like, well, this says in this line in your deck. And I was like,
yeah, oh no, exactly. I need to go back and change that.
I have to answer to that now.
So you learn, I believe we learn the most when we fail, not when we win, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure you would probably agree with that. So the failure happens.
Yeah.
What did that feel like? And then how did you get the muster to keep moving forward onto what became something really interesting?
What was worse, not getting into medical school or failing in the first company?
Good question. I think they were about equal. Okay. I was pretty depressed. I actually ended up, thankfully I was a house officer memorial. By then I had left medical school, become a resident. I was treating like I was on like a bone marrow transplant ward at Sloan when the company went under. And I spent a year or two just going back to kind of my work as becoming a physician scientist. A couple years just kind of also realizing that, I just needed to mature a little bit. I think some people are more mature at certain ages and whatnot. And Kevin Rakin called me a couple years into faculty, and we had a cup of coffee over at Blue State. I was just Blue State thinking about it. And he said, hey, how's life going? And so, well, I'm a couple years into attending and this and that. And he said, do you want to start another company? And I said, yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, I think I'm ready. And this was 2016. And he said, and this is where team comes in. He said, well, I've got just the guy named Per Helson. He was just coming off another company called Cybrexa that he had started. And he had a rapid exit over a couple years. And let me introduce you to him. And I sat down at another coffee shop, Per and I and Kevin, and I found a partner in crime that was just driven. I mean, this guy, eat, drink, sleep, entrepreneurship, wants to start companies, and paired up with me, very scientifically minded. Peter Glazer, my old mentor who started Helix, I brought him in, and we thought about what's something that we've been wanting to sort of commercialize, and it turned out to be tumor-targeted drug delivery. And we end up in-licensing this technology from Yale, from a guy named Don Engelman and some other folks, who was my professor in Yale during undergrad, which is a really crazy kind of life comes full circle. We in-license it, and this is like totally just an idea in the sky. We put $5-6 million behind it, but we make sure that we make that key thing is get the right team together. Per and I came in kind of as an interim CSO, and we started recruiting, and we had a few people that we recruited, and we immediately said, get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus. Good to Great principle, book that everyone has to read if you're interested in entrepreneurship or any leadership organizational thing that you're involved with.
Jim Collins needs to sponsor us because I feel like we give Jim Collins so much love.
It's not even a joke.
All the hedgehog principle, Stockdale paradox. I think about these things all, and Stockdale paradox is what's gotten
levels of leadership. So much,
level 5 leadership, and so that was where I started applying those lessons because Per and Kevin made me read that book, and so that company we applied those principles, got the right team together, and you realize when you get one or two people can make all the difference. This is one of the things I've learned. I've learned this after Cybrexa, there was Alphina, which we'll get to in a minute, but that was huge.
You're very clearly a creative entrepreneur, scientist. I feel like there's not enough adjectives in my dictionary to describe you, and I mean that in a very true way. What is the chemistry of what makes a great team? Break that down, because it's as much as an art as it is a science, as it is an experimentation, and there's no accurate answer for this, in my opinion. That I know because of just the human condition. But in your mind, what do you think makes for the tools for getting the right people on the bus, the tools for getting
Yeah.
the right people off the bus.
Yeah.
Any pearls of wisdom that you have that have worked for you?
Great question. And interestingly, I've thought about this a lot, and it actually applies to academic collaborations as well as just projects in general, and, in bands. What is it that, if you think of like a drummer and a guitarist, like that, where neither knows how to play the other instrument, just like Seth Hers and I, when we made this big discovery published in Science, my favorite collaboration, because neither of us really knew what the other person was doing, but we trusted each other deeply. And so we could disagree and debate certain things, but it would never be like, Ranji, you don't know what you're talking about chemistry wise. I can't do that. It would be, and same thing with me. I wouldn't be like, well, Seth, I can't prove that mechanism, that thing on the moon, the DNA, I can't see it and whatnot. And I think the ability for two people to trust each other, and I think trust, So being able to be creative, being able to argue and debate, and trust each other, even though you don't know what the other person is really doing, if that makes sense in a weird way. And with Per and I, at Cybrexa, that was one of the best things I loved about him, is that, I could teach him science and he could teach me, how to build these companies. And the two of us were able to sort of operate. And then we brought in a CSO, and the same principle was there, where everyone wanted to know at a high level what everyone was doing to make sure that it wasn't too crazy. But we all really didn't understand what the other person was doing. I think that's some of the best. And then unfortunately, you need someone in that crew that is able to do the disciplined things, like get the wrong people off the bus, to cut those budgets.
What's the formula for trust, right? So one of the things, it's funny you mentioned bands, and I want to nerd out with you on music. Maybe we have time for, maybe we don't. But when you're in college, university, or in bands, but as we get into our adult years in this sort of virtual world, and we're going to talk about what it's like to run a virtual company, that's part of our notes as well. But in the world today, in our adulthood, like you strike me as someone that, would be an awesome friend, someone that just bounce different ideas off, because we're so different, but there's a lot of interesting overlap with our obsessions, even though there's so many different fields. What's the formula for trust, and how do you go about building new trusted relationships in your adult life, which is clearly something that you've been successful at?
I think that is one of the hardest things. Just like I was talking with a friend about that, it's like, it's hard to make new good friends like later in life. Like a lot of your friends are from back in the old days. I think as it applies to entrepreneurship, I think this is a huge issue, because a lot of people trust people way too much, so it's a weird analogy, but in the, when I treat patients, I'm a radiation oncologist and I'm a radiosurgeon. So we treat very specific tumors with very high doses of radiation, and we make recommendations. And when we talk to our colleagues, we're all extensively board certified up the wazoo. And we have to maintain our credentialing, and it takes us often 15 years to get to the spot that we are. And as a result, one of the benefits of being amongst a physician practice at an academic center, generally unlikely your colleague is going to do something that's just insane, right? And so I can say, hey, can you cover this case for me? And I know this person isn't going to overdose their brainstem and cause necrosis or rapid infarction of the tissue, right? And it's actually easy to do it if you do it the wrong way. But we just trust. I'm not like, hey, can I see your board credentials? Because I know he's a faculty member. In the entrepreneurship world, biotech world, any sort of startup world, I'm sure you see this as well, it's easy to drop a lot of like words and language and say, oh yeah, I know about pay to play or a cap table or a ratchet or a liquid pref, participating preferred. And all of a sudden you sound really smart and you start impressing someone else. But there is actually no credentialing. Like, you're not like, I'm a biotech entrepreneur, license 793, here's my certification, right? And so as a result, I always say to startup entrepreneurs, I'm like, oh, this person wants to do a deal with me and he wants me to sign this document. I said, first of all, get a really good lawyer. Dormer Stevens, the lawyer for all my companies. Get a lawyer from Wigan and Dana or Shipman Goodman. Get someone first to look at your founder agreement. Fact check who this person is. What deals have they done? So Kevin Rakin, great reputation. Other folks in the community, Dan Wagner, Connect Innovations. Make sure that the people that you're working with have been fact checked by others, and call people. Don't email people, because no one's going to put that stuff in writing.
You cannot do enough due diligence on people.
Right.
It comes up all the time. We've dealt with it. I backed a founder recently, and all of a sudden his whole entire resume just I'm like, none of this stuff is adding up. You clearly don't know what the hell you're doing, and we see all these holes. What did you really do with this company? And all of a sudden, it was too late because we got excited and we got romantic about the idea.
Yeah,
and we thought he was good because on paper he was great. Well, turned out to be a shit show that we're trying to unwind right now.
I don't want to
more painful,
very painful. I don't know. I actually know that story because you're one of my best friends, and I'm. So we're not going to unpack that. But what I'm hearing is essentially just apply the scientific method to humans, which is let's make sure that we test our hypotheses, we prove and validate prior to making large commitments. Is that fair?
100%. And so we had I would just say one of my companies, for confidentiality, even though it's public knowledge, we hired someone at a high level who came recommended by a bunch of people to take the senior scientific role. And then they got there and it was a mess. And it was surprising because the person came from big pharma. They had this very nice resume. And what's fascinating to me is that
it's easy to hide in big companies.
Yeah, and then
even
they
the
come out.
recommendations, they fool a lot of people.
They do. And what's funny is then when you go back to the people that recommended them, they all wash their hands. Oh, well, you know, actually I didn't know them that well. And you're like, well,
he was like that back in the day. I don't know if
he's very concerning, I'm sorry to, And so I think that exactly applying what I like to call orthogonal validation. Our head of HR at Modifi, a guy named Kurt Andrews, he was the head of HR for Immunomedics. And I've learned so much about him, about how to hire people, how to reference check, how to ask very specific questions. And so again, I think having multiple different independent ways to validate this person, because people can be on their best behavior, just like at a dinner party, and then at home you realize they're doing some bad things at home.
What about assholes? How do you deal with assholes? Like we had a PhD from Yale that worked with us for a period of time, and he said that there's a lot of great people at Ivy League schools. He's like, but there's a lot of people that are assholes.
Yeah.
They're like these academic assholes. They're so into themselves and they're hard to talk to and hard to make friends. I'd imagine in your world, there's a tremendous amount of academic people. Mm-hmm. But they're probably some of the smartest people in the world. Like I've met doctors.
Yeah.
When my brother had cancer, he would be like, I don't like this guy. His bedside manner sucks. And I'm like, you're not hiring him for his bedside manner. You're hiring him to save your life.
Exactly.
But it bothered him. He was like, I just can't relate to this guy. And I think, and then it happened to other people that I know now that my world of cancer has sort of expanded, sadly. How do you deal with that when you have someone that's so brilliant but such an asshole?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think on the entrepreneur side with my companies, we've been very specific with our scientific advisory boards. We kind of have a no asshole rule. So I've built every SAB, set of my SABs at Cybrexa and Alphina and Modifi most recently. And we just don't put up with it because my belief is that, it's hard to find someone that is a total asshole and you absolutely need them, because I think you can get that expertise from other people in this day and age. And thankfully, with the internet and the virtual world, you can now Zoom with people. I think the exceptions rule is just like you said. If there's this brain surgeon up in Boston or New England that was a really good surgeon, was the only one that could operate on you, and was a complete asshole, he or she. Yeah, that's a situation where I like just do the surgery and just don't talk to me. Just don't make me paralyzed. But I think in the biotech world and whatnot, we've just sort of insulated ourselves, because I think thankfully there are enough smart people that don't have those attitudes, because I think they're ultimately destructive to things that we want to get done.
Do you have a process? Like we had an entrepreneur on here that would always go to lunch and would always take the person they were hiring to like an inexpensive like buffet or something, just to see, like, put them under pressure and see what happens. Like, do you have I hate to say sniffing out an asshole.
Well,
but
no, it's kind of like the Zappos test, right?
How do you do it?
Zappos was really known for they would plant the bus driver was actually they called it the bus driver test, and this is well published if you haven't heard of this, and they're known for customer experience and culture and the whole thing. Obviously acquired by Amazon, et cetera. But they would. New recruits to the company, they would do two things. One, they would offer to pay you a fee to walk away and leave, and because they wanted to see people's determination.
Oh,
And
interesting.
that was one thing. It was a really interesting thing.
That's crazy.
And then the other thing is they saw how you treated the bus driver.
Oh, wow.
And that was a sort of determination. If you're not going to treat the bus driver that's taking you to where you're whatever well, you're not going to treat our customers well when they have a problem. So that was the thing. So do you have this story that David's talking about was one of the entrepreneurs, very successful, now runs a venture studio. He was talking about they were bringing on an executive, and they would take the executive sort of for a long walk at this kind of buffet style place just to see like if they like hoity-toity about it. Or
No
so
Uber, no
do you
cabs.
have a buffet or a bus driver test in your mind?
We do. It's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, and I've learned it from Modifi. It took me 3 companies to figure this one out. But almost everyone that we interview at any level of the organization, we have them meet with as many people along our job ladder, so to speak. So, our office manager, our, even if it's a very high level chemist, we have them meet like our, biology tech for 10, 15 minutes. And we actually, this is Kurt, our head of HR, helped us do this, is that we then collect all of that feedback. I used to think it was just, you just hire whoever you want. You're the boss, I'm the acting CEO. I just hire this person if I want them, that's it. But you actually get the feedback of everyone. We've actually had one experience at Modifi with one person that didn't end up working for us because the person I learned for the first time, I learned the concept of managing up versus managing down. And I didn't know that was a real thing. So I didn't know that there are people in this world because I'm just a different person. I'm just very much the same person to everyone, right? And maybe that's why I'll never be famous or something, but I don't know. But this person managed up really well. Like I'd be talking and incredibly respectful to me. I'm just gonna say he, she, so we don't identify it. And then met one of my lab people from the Bindra lab because I just wanted some people to interact. Was incredibly sexist, incredibly rude. And our lab is big into DEI and just equality across the board. And just humans. Yeah, just humans. It was wild. And it was actually like the person called me up and said, listen, I'm really sad. I know you want this person. And I feel bad saying, I said, no, tell me what happened. And then it was like, oh, go get me coffee or go do this and that. And then, so it turns out the person like doesn't know how to manage down, but manage up. And then my antenna went up on that. Now when I screen people, I'll call other people about that person and I'll hear that phrase, oh, this person manages up, be careful. They don't manage down very well. And you can't, in a small startup environment, every single member of that team needs to be well aligned because your company's going to go down if you don't.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. These are areas, these are the pitfalls. This is about getting the right people on the bus and, to your point, getting the right people off the bus. Yeah. I think it's harder than most people give credit for. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important.
The 1,000% needles in the haystack. I mean, how many business books have you read that are 300 plus pages and the one pearl of wisdom is just like buried in 2 sentences in the middle of it? And, it's easy to miss, right? Yeah. It's easy to miss with all the, all the puffery that you see on social media now. That's just scratching the surface. But those are the things I think are going to be valuable for people. So thank you for sharing that.
We 100%. Say it all the time. The number one lesson that we learn over and over and over is hire slow, fire fast.
Yes.
It's hard because you got to move fast.
Yep.
And that's why I said you learn it over and over and over, because no matter how many times I've said that in the last 17 years, I have continued to make the mistake because you're human.
A global leader of a pretty big pharmaceutical company that I know from radiation oncology, who's mentored me as well. And that's the other advice, if I ever forget, is just get as many mentors as you can and have a board of directors of mentors and don't rely on one person. But this person actually said that exact thing, which is never rush to fill a position just because you're rushed to fill it. And it's very similar to what you said, because you need to think about each one of your hires. And it's better just to leave that position open rather than to fill it.
Yeah, it's remarkable. The old saying, Zuckerberg, I think he coined the phrase like move fast and break things. Like in some parts of entrepreneurship is like you have to move fast, you have to iterate and in your case test and learn and so on and so forth. And I love that speed. But the thing that's been coming up, the theme that's been coming up with a lot of these entrepreneurs that we've had on the show, and I think you just said it yourself, is slow down. Mm-hmm. Because it's you have, it's almost a conductor for an orchestra. You have to be able to speed things up and then slow it down on a dime, because it's those areas when you don't slow down that can create the biggest ripples that you don't see coming that knock you down.
Yeah.
It's the modulation though, right? Like, one of my favorite books is Thinking Fast and Slow. It's like, there's this perception of speed in companies. And I think that, you and I are very big into like, well, there's some things that need to move really fast, and then there's some things that need to slow down. People always, I say, knock you and say like, oh, David moves too fast. He's always breaking things. It's like, no. David moves fast on very specific things. Yeah. He moves very slow, almost molasses slow on certain things, but it's the important things, right? Yeah. So I think it's the modulation. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that we live in a generation today, not generation, it's society. It's not a generation. This is a human condition problem, which is where we generalize. Yeah. We generalize and we distort information to make the word speed means one thing. Yeah. Well, no, we want speed in experimentation. We want speed in feedback loops, right? We don't want speed in putting the wrong person on the bus, right?
100%. So it's funny you mentioned that, because I was just at dinner talking to the Modifi team about this, because, we have a lead candidate and we have a next gen series, and, one person and I were talking about this, and he or she, just so I don't identify, was saying, we need to make a decision on either this pathway or this pathway. And I was explaining, I said, listen, nothing's binary in the startup world. Okay. These two programs can actually just move at different speeds. We can slow this program down, and these are complicated, dog, cyno experiments and PK/PD profiling, and then we can move the other thing at a slightly different speed and overlay that with funding, because we're trying to do a seed 2 right now, because it's not the best time to raise money, and we're hoping it brightens up soon. But as we get an understanding of how much funds we're going to get in, we can then start speeding things up and slowing things down. And that's the beauty, by the way, of entrepreneurship in startup world, is imagine doing that at like a large corporation. You'd have to have committee upon committee. And that's what's fascinating about early stage, and why entrepreneurs that are thinking about it's so much fun to do this, because you can deploy capital. You can drop $300,000 tomorrow and then pull something out this way and then move it this way. And you just can't do that in many other environments. Yeah.
My intuition is telling me that you are a part of 4 different companies, because I very much, and it's the musician in you, I very much see you as a conductor, where you're conducting all these different orchestras, but you realize that you've got very different instruments and very different, compositions in these different companies. And that's one of the reasons that you're doing so many. Is that a fair?
No, it's 100%. I was telling my wife today, I spent a little bit of time over at Modifi, and we had an ops meeting, and there's a set of needs at that company at its stage. We'll probably drop by Alphina, which has a new CEO, and just kind of check in, make sure things are going well. And then stopping by Cybrexa, which, just did a $700 million deal with Exelexis. Again, that idea that we scratched on the wall, just to meet their CMO, and just to kind of, very, like you said, very specific, hey, how's the trial going? And how can I help you in terms of your accrual and whatnot? And each company has these different needs, and it's just fascinating to watch them kind of go through those stages. Yeah.
So speaking of speeding things up and slowing things down, I guess go back and then speed up the conversation a little bit, because this has been fascinating, but we are approaching over an hour in the conversation. Kevin, so I'm going to take us back. Kevin calls you up. You've gone through your maturity period. Yep. Kevin calls you up and says, "Hey, do you have any ideas?" Mm-hmm. And this is when you would go on to co-found Cybrexa,
yep.
Cybrexa
Yep.
Therapeutics, which is 2017. Walk us through that, and that's going to be that'll be your first exit, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take us through that.
Yeah. It was funny. He called, and I sort of had this obsessive idea about. This is a great example of nanoparticles, and I was like, we just have to do this. And the first thing I learned to do is like sound check your ideas with other people, like talk to the market. People that you're really like innovative people, that because a lot of people just say everything's a bad idea. That's a startup. Went to Peter Glazer and I said, I'm thinking about doing this. And he said, actually, have you thought about this peptide drug conjugate approach? And, here's why I think you should do this. And I'd love to be a founder with you. And again, gears turning that this is a really good trusted person that I can bring in. That's a person that is brilliant, and I want to be a partner with him. It was going to dilute my stake. So obviously I'm like, I had to, I don't want to lose my equity stake, but I said, you know what? who cares about dilution right now? Because if I get the right team, this is going to survive the test of time. So, that was one of the first things. The next thing was, tried to thought block as I've been told to do certain things like, the Cybrexa email to tell everyone that I started a company and they think I look really cool. That email, look at this company I started. Just think about, is this business model sound? Is there a path forward? Can we get the IP license? Can we get under terms that we're actually going to be, agreeable, and 5 years down the line facilitate the acquisition or the exclusive option deal that Exelixis did for $700 million, because they, it could be make or break. Funny thing is, people always, well, what's the name Cybrexa? Turned out we just went to Brand Bucket, and there's a website you can go, because people are like, well, no, you have to get the perfect name. Well, companies are just the name. It's just a state of mind, right? So we ended up getting, we did Cybrexa from Brand Bucket. You could buy for $2,000, like, whatever. And then we, literally, well, what about the logo? And then we just went to 99 Designs, which is another for entrepreneurs to go to. And the logo, everyone's like, where's this design came from? I'm like, it's actually just this 99 Designs thing where some artist from like the Eastern Bloc did it for us for like $100. So once all those things literally focused on the mission, which is we got to build up the lab. We got to talk to the right people to set up the right experiments in that first year. We got to hire the right team to the team that can work together. And so really hyper obsessed about just making sure every piece of the initial airplane as it got off the ground was up, even if no one knew the company existed, if that makes sense. And that's brought into Alphina as well. That company's essentially in stealth mode, but I used to hammer people, we need a website, we need this, we need that. But it's not about, this isn't for show. This is about building something. And so I'll stop there. But yeah,
it's such an interesting thing. So I being that Peter and I come from a brand and marketing space, your industry is one of the few industries where name and brand doesn't have as much impact on a startup company, right? Because the people, if it works, if it does what it's supposed to do, that's all that matters. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it is, there's certainly companies that have, biotech companies that have started that have overused their brand and their name. But that's the fascinating thing about these therapeutics is the true test of success is they get in the clinic and they start shrinking tumors. And that's what I love also about the oncology market and whatnot.
Yeah. I do think, so I've got a spicy take on that. I want to share it with you. And I might fall flat on my face to your audience. And I'm okay with that because it's a learning experiment, right? While I don't think your logo and your name and those aspects of your brand identity matter, I do believe that the story and the narrative and the purpose absolutely matters for a couple of reasons. One is the problem and the transformation that you're setting up to do, something that's going to make people want to get on the bus with you, right?
Internal.
So there's that rally cry, right?
Yes.
So for me, the brand narrative, I think, is mission critical.
Yes.
I think it'll help with raising funds. I think it'll help with getting the right people. And I think it'll help with people willing and wanting to be associated with the organization. So I feel like a lot of times people hear the word brand and they think logo, fonts, colors, when actually brand is so much more than that. So my take on it is that I've recently taken an interest because of what my wife's been going through with her battle and looking at biotech companies and saying, you know what, I want to find the smartest, craziest, creative scientists on the planet, and I want to help them tell their story. And it's been like a little bit of a mission thing for me this past year. I'm like, you know what, maybe my next thing is like really helping these super geniuses that are not assholes tell their story, because I've seen the power of it, right? I won't bias it, but let's just say I'm working with an AI company right now. They just got a bunch of funding, and CEO called me the other day and was just, gushing over a meeting that they had. And I was like, oh, thanks so much. He goes, dude, the pitch deck and the way that we talk about ourselves now completely changed how people look at us in meetings. And I'm walking to meetings with CEOs with so much confidence. So for me, my spicy take is I do think brand matters. I don't think the name matters. I don't think the logo matters. So definitely 5 or a 99 design away. But I do think investing in that narrative, that vision, because when you sell the transformation and people buy into it and you're not Theranos, it's a game changer. That's my take. What do you think?
Huge. No, that's exactly kind of almost, I like it because you've kind of reframed what I was thinking was, it's not, you can go to 99 Designs, you can do all those things and realize that you could have best logo and the coolest deck in the world, and it just doesn't matter. And I've actually been amazed by that with Modifi in particular. We've been able to recruit some people from across the US who've left publicly traded companies to come join a seed stage company with capital that, through this year. And actually, to your point, the resonating frequency when you come in and say, we're going to change the way we treat brain tumors. And I'm not lying. Like, I really believe it. I mean, hopefully we'll be right. But when I say we are revolutionizing the way we're thinking about attacking these tumors, it's actually amazing how people still want to follow a mission and do good things and work for a higher purpose, where one can get jaded after a while and think that people don't really care. And that's just about their options, or it's about how much money or how much job security. But people still get, I'm actually amazed and I know we're, running out of time, but I'm actually amazed that, when I mention patient stories, like if you come to 55 Church and visit our laboratory, welcome to come for a tour. I've actually set it up in a very way anytime. And I've got family patients that I've treated, adults and kids with brain tumors. Some of them are alive and some of them didn't make it, that I've treated over the last decade. We have them on the wall. And I called each one of the family members, first of all, and they're like, absolutely. But I was amazed because I'd have people that come through, some of our employees, and I just tell them these stories and they'd almost be to tears because I'm so used to it, treating patients every week. I didn't realize how impactful and how people actually really still want to save the world, which is great. Yeah.
Well, and it's also like, it's mirror neurons in us is what creates empathy. I mean, you know that more scientifically than I do. It's when you walk down an aisle in a store or when you're on an e-commerce site, the reason why the people put pictures of humans on the boxes, toothpaste, that is because the person is almost always looking at the product, and that actually creates a subconscious connection with brand. There's been studies up the wazoo on this that with way smarter people than us, or me. I don't know if there's way smarter people than you, but me. So I do think that human connection is really important. So I love the fact that you're seeing that, and I'm glad that I didn't fall completely on my face with that take, which is good.
Yeah, no, it's great, actually. I love it.
All right, so we're going to come back. So you're developing an entirely new class of small molecule DNA repair inhibitors.
Yeah.
You raised $5 to $6 million. Was that heavily on your back, or did you have a co-founder that helped you with that? Or
yeah, so part of, I think, as you folks know well, I absolutely love raising money. I mean, obviously I don't like it when I don't get the money I raise, but I love pitching and I love getting people to invest. And Modifi was a company where we started with a friends and family round, and I call it a true friends and family round, where I called it my college roommate. I called it my sister. And I said, listen, I just really believe in this technology. We're about to publish a paper in Science, and I've been in the laboratory, running a lab for 11 years, studying DNA repair for 20 years. I've just never seen anything like this before.
Can you call me? Can I get on that list?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
I was like, how do I get on your list, man?
Yeah. I'll send you our deck afterwards.
No,
you know what's funny though?
On a serious note, please do.
A lot of entrepreneurs don't like pitching and don't like raising money. I actually enjoyed it myself. So that's funny. I haven't heard a lot of people like, oh, I hate the process. It makes me feel dirty or this or that, whatever it is. You like it. That's
because I think when you realize that there are people, someone explained this to me only recently, that, listen, there are people that have saved money and they've got money in savings accounts, money markets, S&P, but then they've got a certain amount of money that they want to play with, and they might give you a hard time if it goes under, but they're okay with it. And I've got a couple of friends of mine now who, what you don't want to do is, go to your, a mom and pop that's their entire savings, obviously. Yeah. But when you realize that there are people with pots of money that they want to invest in venture stuff or stuff that has a higher purpose,
accredited investors that are smart and have the wherewithal to understand the risk.
Exactly. And so we did friends and family. It was a great, we raised about $1 million, and then we went ahead and did a price round, a seed round. We priced at $10 million pre-money, and on the post was about 16.8 when the notes converted and everything. So now we're in that stage of when you talked about earlier about weathering the storm, and I think this is one of the true tests for entrepreneurship, is just not giving up. We're looking at our cash runway, trying to close another round as soon as possible, and just realizing that this is life. This is trying to get that plane off the ground, and just have to have the spirit to say this is going to happen, because we believe in the science, we believe in the people. We're gonna make this.
So you just did I've never heard this term, the exclusive option that you just did in fall of 22 for closed at a $702 million. It was a $702 million deal.
Yeah,
which is in your industry is considered an exit. What does it mean?
Yeah. So I'll start first. Yeah. But one question I get on panels and stuff is, what is an exit for entrepreneurship? And one thing I will mention is I feel like an exit is whatever anyone defines it as. And I it's funny because some people, I just met a few senior kind of CSO level people that said an exit for success for them is getting a drug that's FDA approved, not just getting it into clinical trials, which I thought was fascinating. So, that guy's no good. He actually never developed a drug that was FDA approved, but he took the company public for $5 billion, but that was not enough. I think that, obviously the strict definition of an exit is some form of liquidity where you've got equity that you can then convert. For me, and then I can get back to what Cybrexa is really it's an exit is basically taking an idea, assembling a team, and capitalizing that company so that it now has many years of capital where it's not just running out of gas and jumping to the next. It's that airplane that's taken off the ground, taken off. You're building the plane while you're flying. It's not clear it's going to crash, not clear where it's going to go. But then you get to that altitude where, they get the ding and like now the internet's working and you're able to get up and go to the bathroom, stuff like that. That for me is an exit because this company's now capitalized through, next several years. Yeah. And now, it's up to them to do another acquisition deal because it's an exclusive option on only one of the assets that's developing.
Right. It's crossing that chasm, right?
Yeah, crossing that chasm and where you go from there. Who knows? But yeah,
I love that and your analogy and the visual. I felt like I was on a plane and the light just went off, and you can now roam around the.
Yeah, every time I get on a plane, I think about that, man. You're on the taxi trying to take off, and you're taking off, and there's that critical moment right when the jet's coming off the ground where things are like the seats are jiggling and everyone's and you're like, you can't stop, you can't go any higher. This is just startup in motion, right? Yeah. It's either going to take off or it's going to go down.
It's also the exact moment my son goes, "Daddy, I have to pee."
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So you said you were going to come back to Cybrexa and talk a little bit more about that. Please do.
So it's been fascinating because Cybrexa was literally an idea in a coffee shop with Paracelson, Kevin Rakin, and Peter Glazer, and still remember writing stuff down on a napkin. And we were meeting at this virtual space on Chapel Street. And I forgot what the Grove, I think. Yeah. Right. So we get the rented space, people drinking coffee, we're like angling around them, trying to get the company off the ground. And
come here the next time you have $1 billion idea. We'll make sure the coffee's good.
I want all the calls.
Exactly.
You're welcome.
We got a cool space for you.
I know this is great here. But Cybrexa now it's 10,000 square feet, 25 FTEs on its way to 30 to 40. It's my favorite founder moment was I think a year ago. I was at a board meeting and I was getting some coffee and some employee comes up and just say, "Hey, how's it going?" And I said, "Oh, going well." And he's like, "You come around here often?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm just here just to, just for the day for the board meeting." And the guy was like, "Who are you?" I was like, "I'm one of the founders of the company." And he was like, "Oh shit." And he's like, and I was like, no, it's okay. No, man, I'm just one of the founders. I'm just happy you guys are all, and that's my sign of an exit also, is that when you can start a company that is now fully functioning and that was your idea and now it's all, and you can barely even control it now because it's just doing its own thing. And there are people there that have never really met you. That's just the coolest thing ever. I think some people are like, "Oh, how dare they don't know me? I want a picture of me on the wall." But I think it's just amazing to see this now fully functioning laboratory that we built a vivarium from scratch. We fully functioning chemistry center, clinical trials unit that's operational. We've got patients with a complete response, and that's in the public domain. A patient that has not had their disease come back. Metastatic ovarian cancer, just really exciting to see that the drug's actually working in patients. So,
congrats. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
That is absolutely amazing. You have, and now you have more companies.
Yes.
Okay. A glutton for punishment. Tell us, you have Alphina and Modifi, correct?
Yeah. So Alphina was a great experience again of, we made a big discovery in our laboratory. It's on NAD metabolism, which is basically NAD is the currency of the cell and the energy of life. And again, we spun that out. We did a friends and family round. We leveraged the Blavatnik Foundation. There's a grant opportunity community here, which is just fabulous. And this is really why the Yale entrepreneur community now with Josh Cabell in charge is just really thriving.
We've had him on the show.
He's
Awesome.
a force of nature,
Good friend.
Yeah, gosh. And we started that company, and that was another story where 2 years ago we couldn't find space in New Haven. Believe it or not, now with all the space open now, we couldn't find any lab space, so we actually had to open up the laboratory in New York City at the Launch Labs. Fabulous, but the rent was just New York City prices. So another lesson in entrepreneurship for me is when you have that birth of your baby, generally need to be around for that child for those formative years. And a great example there is just I wasn't able to get in the city as much, and that company it was too early for me to not be involved. And the company kind of, went through some growing pains is what I'll say. Ultimately, when I started Modifi, we're the founding tenant of the Elm City Bioscience Center on 55 Church.
Goldblum's building.
He
copied me.
Yeah, Goldblum, he's a great
He's
guy.
a great guy.
Yeah, we came to him and he said he wanted to build a Biotech Center, and we were Spiegels, and we were the first people in. We were able to, when Modifi set up there, I was actually able to bring Alphina all the way back, and they're now subletters in Modifi on the second floor. And that has made a great difference because now I can stop by that company every couple weeks and say, hey guys, what's going on?
Proximity is very important.
Yeah, we had a Yale academic founders kind of meeting with the Alphina folks. So it's been really great. And that's another example where we brought in a CEO, Mark Cockett. We hired this guy, just a hungry, driven, kind of, again, forward obsessed thinker, just always thinking about the company. And now he's built it up to, I believe, 14 FTEs. The company's humming, running on all cylinders. So that's one company there. So we've got that. We got Modifi, and then we sort of have a very stealth mode one around nanoparticles, which we hope to hopefully have open once the sun shines in the cloudy world of biotech.
Do you believe? So you mentioned NAD. That's a hot,
It's funny. I was
a
gonna
hot
ask him the same
topic in the
question, like, should I be getting the NAD
Anti-aging.
replaced?
in the anti-aging world.
Yeah,
NAD. Like this place I go to. I like cryotherapy.
Yeah.
The torture for the 3 minutes is awesome. And they do NAD plus
like IV stuff, right?
Yeah, like
treatment.
niacin, true niacin.
Yeah, and then they also just added ozone.
Yeah.
Where they run your blood through ozone.
Nice.
Ozone therapy. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
I like the whole anti-aging body hacking world. You think, is that real?
So great. So another shout out to a guy named Charlie Brenner. So he discovered part of the NAD salvage pathway when we made the Alphina scientific discovery academically. Again, not to draw these weird parallels with everything, but we made a discovery in the lab and we found a biomarker, but we had no idea like the mechanism of action. And so I called up the chair of biochemistry at Iowa. I never met him before, and I'm the king of just calling random people and harassing them obsessively until they pick up the phone. He picked up the phone. Finally.
We were very much alike.
Yeah, and finally he picked up the phone. I said, I'm a young attending. I need your help. And Charlie Brenner said, I'm going to help you. We ended up starting Alphina together. He discovered part of the NAD pathway. He actually helped us solve the problem, the mechanism of action. We figured out, published it in Nature Communications, spun out the company. But part of his NAD research is around NAD and aging. And he's got a wonderful Twitter feed, and you can email me to get on, about 50,000 followers or so. And he's one of my favorite anti-aging people because the problem with aging research is it's very phenomenological. It's so cliche and high impact that anyone's trying to get their say in, and you follow him on his Twitter feed and he'll actually evaluate some of these aging things because there's something truly to it. But there's a lot of debate, the David Sinclair and other folks. There's all these different groups of people that have espoused, and I'm not going to say who's right or wrong. But I think there is something to it, but we need the right people to guide us through that wilderness.
There's a lot of bullshit, a lot of snake
My
oil
brother
out
used to
there.
say, if there's no peer-reviewed journal, it's bullshit.
Yeah, it's hard. Exactly. It's just like nutrition and cancer. Some of the very important for cancer, but some of the diets that are recommended for patients with brain tumors are tough because the studies around them are just really not substantiated. So
That was a lot of the
Sugar,
struggle.
no sugar, and all that. Kind
yeah, like cancer cell needs sugar. Well, the brain's really good at delivering sugar in the local environment. So there's a lot of complexity there, but that's separate.
Yeah, no, we got a lot of really shitty mixed answers when we were trying to look into that. So I might email you about that.
Yeah, totally.
For sure. So virtual companies was something we really wanted to get into.
Yeah.
I know. So there's a lot of statistics out there right now that are saying, specifically with younger generations, we see this a lot with the, I hate to say Gen Z because it spans so many different age groups. And I think, a 15-year-old is different than a 16-year-old and a 7-year-old. But just to generalize for a moment, which I know is a problem in society, but a lot of folks are saying they don't want to work in an office environment. They want to work in remote. Some folks, are graduating school now or starting at jobs, and they don't know what an in-office environment is. They don't have those skills or experiences. I'm getting the sense from some of the research we did on you that launching and growing companies virtually was as much of a pain point for you as it is for many folks. Yeah. So if you could maybe just unpack for the audience a little bit about maybe some of your learnings, some of your philosophies, and just what you think the future looks like with respect to building virtual companies.
So really good question. I have actually thought the silver lining of the pandemic has been the conversion to allowing virtual. I've thought about this a lot because, we actually closed our Alphina, round, a large Series A, which hasn't been fully disclosed yet. But it was virtual, and it was almost comedic because the summer after was right when it opened up before Omicron, I think, and we all met up in the city, the founders and some of the investors, and we realized we had never met each other in person, which was really wild. And so I'm a big believer that first of all, the virtual workplace is not going to go away. This is just sort of like the way it is now. And I think if you do it smart and in the right mix, so setting up, first of all, hybrid rooms is as naive as that or easy as that sounds, but at Modifi OC, we have the OWL system with mics everywhere. We have a big screen TV, and we basically allow people to connect in virtually. And then I think the key is to mix it up so that you have enough infusions of in-person meetings. So tomorrow, Modifi has an all-hands staff retreat. People are coming in because we're virtual. We have about half of our people are remote all the way out to California. Everyone's flying in or training in, and we're all going to be together in a room for the day. And I think by infusing every quarter with physical visits, not being a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but you then know the 3D interaction or the 4D interaction of a person because you've seen them in person, so that then when you see them on Zoom, I think you're able to kind of remember who that person is, if that makes sense. I think that if you only meet someone on Zoom, it's just like an email or a text. Like you can totally misunderstand the way that they talk and the way that they act because on Zoom, it just looks different.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest keys to success is trying to just mix it up and make it sort of a mix of both virtual and in-person and phone calls and not falling in the trap of like tell my trainees, just because I send a lot of emails to people doesn't mean you can send a lot of emails to people. Pick up the phone and call people. Don't go from, face-to-face Zoom and email. Just pick up the phone and call someone because often talking on the phone is a lot easier than emailing, and whatnot. But
I don't even like getting on like Zoom anymore. If someone sends me a Zoom, I feel like it's just the go-to now. I always pick up the phone.
Yeah,
I'll dial in.
It's easier.
So I want to just go a couple steps deeper. I mean, you know a lot about the brain, probably more than most people. I've seen some studies that folks have done, fMRI studies, et cetera, where they talk about just overexposure to Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
I use Zoom as a virtual on-camera thing. There's a million other platforms. But there's exactly. But where they've seen and they've measured the difference between virtual meetings, non-virtual meetings. A study just came out. I don't know if you're familiar with like the AI nerf stuff, where basically they're correcting the eyes to have, no matter where you're looking, the eyes are always looking at the person using AI, and they're seeing some differences. So I'm curious from your perspective, someone who's very interested in the brain. What have you seen in terms of differences in engagement? You described this sort of 3D, 4D element, but have you seen or observed as a scientist any of the things that I'm describing in your companies and any kind of hot takes on that? Yeah,
there's a great article in the New Yorker and New York Times on why Zoom fatigue exists. And I think one issue is that it's just you're lacking that physical interaction that kind of stresses your brain, not especially in this area. But one thing I've noticed is I feel like Zoom is good for mundane operational meetings where you just need to kind of go through lists of things. But for instance, a Zoom think tank brainstorm session is just on, at least in our hands, is never good. Getting people in a room, because the ability to talk without interrupting, without, the flow of a conversation. And I think and then also just meeting investors. One of our investors, we did everything on Zoom, and then we all met in person, and it was totally different. And then the Zooms after meeting in person were different, if that makes sense.
It does.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there is just something still of that personal interaction that's always going to be incredibly important.
I saw a really interesting take. So my wife works for Disney, and Bob Iger recently got called back to the company. He's a prolific, leader of that massive organization, big vision. He came back, and within a very short period of time, he said everybody has to be back in the office 4 days a week.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which office, but you got to be back in the office 4 days a week. And it sort of rippled through the company. It wasn't handled, to my knowledge, it wasn't handled in the way that a lot of leadership handles things today, where it's like, let's have lots of conversations and surveys and let's see what everybody thinks. It was like, no, here's the email.
Funny thing, that was the second thing he did.
Yeah.
The first thing he did was put more empowerment and autonomy in the hands of creatives, because he believed that creativity is their special sauce in Disney.
So the reason why he called everybody back.
Move. And the second move is what he just described.
And he said the reason why is because we're a creative company, people led, and you can't be as creative if you're not with people.
Totally.
That was one. Then I heard a second take recently, which I thought was really interesting. So in every organization, the goal is to build that company up over a period of time. Senior leaders tend to age out. And what's happening is that they're realizing that the maturation of middle managers down to junior people is not happening fast enough because there's no exposure. We talked about exposure in the beginning as a child. So, and I had not thought about that. So now they're calling people back in, especially in like finance companies, stuff like that, big organizations, because they're like, hey, I got a 65-year-old guy that's about to retire any day, and the guy underneath him is not ready because he spent the last 3 years out of the office and he has no exposure.
Well, that's no
if you're not in the room,
modeling.
if you're not listening to the other people at the table, if you're not learning about finance and leadership and HR and all the things that you have, all you do is get on your Zoom calls and your meetings with your people.
Yep.
You don't have exposure, and that actually slows down the growth of people in your organization.
Because you're killing osmosis.
That was a take I had not yet thought of.
And not to reference another podcast, this is a wonderful.
No,
another podcast.
We're going to charge
we love them.
We're going to charge them. Call and ask
Exactly.
for a referral link.
Reference away.
Is Peter Salovey did the Ice House. Ice House is a podcast on Wall Street, but Peter Salovey from Yale talked, and he studies a lot of sort of social behavior and EQ and whatnot. And I think a lot of it came in the context of the startup world and whatnot, but entrepreneurship is a ton of EQ and your ability to engage. And to your point, I think Zoom is one thing, but being in a room and understanding how to engage your audience and read body language and be able to sort of have a conversation that's a sort of a two-way, it's a huge skill that can't be lost.
Yeah.
Well, it gets back to some of the things that you probably miss about being in the band, right? Which is this idea of creative improv.
Yeah.
Right. There's something when you make a mistake and do something different on your drum set. If I'm the guitarist or he's the singer or whatever, I'll make you a singer. You're like a front man kind of person, like singer type. Is like if I hit something on the guitar and then I respond to you, that improvisation is not necessarily happening. One of the I'm like a huge Rick Rubin fan. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's like produced like every type of music you can think of, and
Beastie Boys, Run DMC,
Eminem. Johnny Cash, et cetera. But he talks a lot about just the creative process and how being together, the energy of it.
Yeah.
Dave, you talk about energy a lot in a lot of different episodes. So it's interesting to see what I'm hearing from you, just to sort of summarize, if I can, is virtual's not going anywhere, but in your belief set, the ability to generate rapport and human connection is really, really critical to be able to create a hybrid environment. So having the right tooling, having the right inclusion, in every sense of the word, and harmony, if you will, among those things is what you believe is the future.
And to pull that all back to what we were just talking about earlier about teams and whatnot, I've been on some pitches where if your team, this is actually Seth and I've had these moments where we've pitched to investors and Mike Dillon or the other guy on the science side, the investors can feel the energy within the group, and that's either in person or on Zoom. But it just, for some reason, reminded me of that. So you have those moments, I'm sure you folks have that moment where you're all playing a song together that is really, you're playing off each other. The investors are looking at this and they're like, oh, I got to be part of this. Because these guys can solve even if this asset fails, these guys are going to figure this out.
It's a good team. It's gel. There's camaraderie. There's all
It's
that
hard.
stuff.
I've found though, like we've used the tools that have like spatial audio. We have a couple owls in the office, so we're big fans of that tech. Owl is a camera device, folks, that just check it out. We'll put it in the show notes. Makes it multiple people being able to engage, whatnot. But we've been business partners for 17 plus years on a number of different companies, and I find it's funny because he mentioned how much he hates Zoom. I find being on Zoom with him and trying to conduct a meeting with other people is impossible in person, because I know his energy, I know his things, and I think likewise. But even on Zoom, even with him, 17 years behind us in terms of experiences, it's hard to play off one another and to find the right thing. It just has a weird vibe.
It's just a weird vibe. Yeah, no, I agree.
Interesting. No, this is I'm glad you shared that, and I think that I'm back over to you.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna take this to a crescendo at this point. I think you've got Alphina. You also co-founded Modifi. You said you have this alternative company. Stealth company. But something changed with Modifi because you are the acting CEO, a position that you've not held throughout your career. And I know it's temporary because you have a lot going on. When I'd imagine that this is a culmination of all the maturity that you've gone through since your first gig. How does it feel so far? What are you learning? What have you learned? And do you have any fears as it relates to this role?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it right there. So I think the first time I could do this role, I think it's taken the learnings from all the different companies, running a lab, treating patients, and just, my mid 40s now, being able to have that maturity and whatnot. I'm certain that other people can do this at a younger age and everyone's different. But I've had to have a leadership coach, which I find highly recommend to people. I've had to have a lot of mentors that I've mentioned earlier that I've had to reach out to, learning how to manage people, how to mentor people, how to hit that sweet spot, how to fundraise, how to not get too emotional, but get emotional enough. I was talking with someone earlier today about how to not get too far in the weeds on certain things and how to delegate. All of those are things that people should realize that those are key things that have to be worked on. And I've had to method act into that. I've had to call CEOs. I've had to call senior leaders and ask them how they do these things without just brute forcing it, because you can't work just 80 hours a week and work through these things. It's almost like a style and an art to it, because you're going to burn out your family life if you work 95 hours a week or something like that. And I've certainly done that before, but I think you got to hit that resonant frequency and delegate and manage and think about the big picture. And then one famous CEO told me it's all about being everywhere but nowhere. You can't, that's the job of the CEO. You want to be around but not be around, and give credit to everyone else. Not realizing that as a CEO, your job is not to take credit for anything. It's actually just to thank people for doing their job and making sure that they have what they need. Those are sort of some of the biggest lessons I've learned, and it's been
the drummer's role, right? The drummer doesn't get any credit.
Yeah, just keeping the rhythm in the background, keeping the groove going.
Most important job.
Yeah, you lay down the track.
Man in the background.
How did you go about searching for and finding a good leadership coach or executive coach?
Yeah, word of mouth. So my head of HR, Kurt Andrews, again, phenomenal guy who knew of someone. And I think, again, there's good coaches and bad coaches. I've had some from other experiences. I think asking around to find someone, talking to other CEOs and other entrepreneurs. And some people say, oh, I don't need that. I'm amazed. Even when I don't want to have my coach meetings with him, we end up having these sessions where I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about this. And even the power of visualization so that you keep your emotional intelligence and your ability to stay calm in situation. So one thing small thing I learned is that people will use your emotions against you. They'll get you angry and then get you to say things and do things in a way where you've lost control.
I've never experienced that before.
It'll knock you off your surfboard, as I say.
It is fascinating, though. The best CEOs in large organizations and the huge organizations, you watch them on TV, you watch them in interviews, and they're unbreakable.
Unbreakable.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I'm learning. I'm in my 40s as well, and I'm
the process.
I am a hothead, but I'm like, most people never see the hot. He's seen the hot because we've been together for 18 years. We're married. It's different.
I've been on the stove.
So
You don't want to be on that stove. But before you ask that question, I have to ask about time, because something I've really been moved with, and especially now with having a son and just really waking up to like just the limitations of time, right? You know, just cracked 40. I'm looking at time very differently now. And you struck on something which I love, which is clearly you don't want to be that burnout, you know, work every moment. You want to be the family person like you described just a moment ago in terms of not working 85, 90 hours a week. How do you yourself, what are some time management techniques that you've developed or picked up along the way as a creative scientist that have worked well for you that maybe others might get inspired by as well?
Yeah, I'll start with the ones that it's funny you mentioned this. I've been particularly obsessed with this actually recently. And I actually ask multiple people on a weekly basis now and you want to ask the right people. You don't want to ask the person that looks like they're just like burnt out and tired, like time management, because they're like, just work all the time, 168 hours in the week, right? You know, for 24 times 7. I first of all, poll people. I've been asking people, and believe it or not, there's actually data around this. So my leadership coach and I have been working on this. And he's actually got an exercise going, which I do on my homework, which is to map out all the standing meetings, the things that I have to do, the things I have to attend, and map that out. And then first of all, see how much time that's taking. And which ones can you trim back? And if you have a set amount of time you want to work, can you really do it with what your schedule is? And then we actually dug up some articles. Highly productive, successful CEOs actually did a survey of like 800 of them, and they asked them the number of hours they work per week. And if you email me, I can give you for the show the link to the article. And he found it for me. It was awesome. But believe it or not, like the average CEO of a very large successful companies doesn't work 80 hours a week. They work something like 60 hours, you know, depending on who you talk to. Yep. And so I, in my 30s, my solution for getting multiple things done at once was just to grind it out with extra hours over the weekend. And my family life took a really big hit for a number of reasons. And so I would just overcome it by just being like, well, I'll just work 80 hours a week. Who cares?
Brute force,
right? And now I'm a situation, you know, personally incredibly happy. My kids are a little bit older, and just have a situation at home where I don't want to miss that out. And I've seen too many patients die recently that regret.
Yeah, that's the big one right there. Once you see people die, you're like,
in their
holy
40s,
shit,
right? And so I started to realize that you need, one of the first things that may be obvious to some is assign amount of time you're going to spend on something rather than saying infinite number of time to spend on something. So unless it's unbelievably mission critical, right? So I'm going to work on this letter of recommendation for a colleague or something like that. Say you're going to spend 1 hour.
That's what ChatGPT's for.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Exactly. I've been meaning to get into that.
Oh, I got you. Trust me. I'm deep in that shit. So.
It's huge. So I think assigning a time that you're going to spend on something, I think delegating, my coach and I were talking about the fact that, would you rather do something yourself and have it at 100% satisfaction to what you want, or have someone else do it at 80%? And that's a classic study where you need to just let other people do it and not be perfect, because that's actually hours upon hours of time. So those are some of the key things I've been working on. And then just trying to, and the one thing, we did an experiment on a Friday where I said, well, I'm supposed to be working all weekend. And he said, well, why don't you do an experiment? Don't do anything. And it was like horrific. I was like, I can't do that. And he said, just try it. And obviously if there's a patient care thing, I go and treat a patient,
of course.
Right?
Of course.
But I didn't do anything that weekend, and nothing happened, you know, and that was 6 months ago, and I'm still around, and hopefully next month. You know?
I'm going to, so I've learned so much from you in this conversation. So I'm going to share something with you that inspired me that might be of value for you.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of writing on productivity and entrepreneurship, and I got the opportunity I got a pre-release early copy of a book called How to Buy Back Your Time.
Oh, nice.
By Dan Martell. Built a giant software company, SaaS guy, really smart. And he introduced me to this concept, which I went down the rabbit hole and went deeper in, which is this 10-80-10 concept. And I shared it with a former guest, which is like, you want to be there to sort of set that vision in the first 10% and let 80% of the work get done by somebody else, and then come back and do the finisher. So starts and finishes are really important. And in that book, he talks a lot about what he calls the sort of time ladder and how to buy back your time. And I got to tell you, I've read a lot of books. What I like about this book is it's not just theory. There's a lot of practical execution.
That's interesting.
But that was helpful. And then the other thing that was really kind of let's just say eye-opening was this concept of like understanding your buyback rate. And understanding like what your time is worth to you, and then setting, like you said, setting those constraints to say like, you know, because what gets scheduled gets managed, what gets managed gets measured, and all that kind of good, you know, the tropes and whatnot. But yeah, that 10-80-10 thing really helped, and it sounds like
interesting.
that might be a value to
I
you.
might take that up. I might try that out.
Yeah.
You know, he said it to me the other day, and I'm really good at the 10 on the back end, but not 10. I don't spend enough time in the front end to get the right 80%. I'm always good at the polish side.
Yeah. That's interesting. No, I love that. No, I like that.
I said it to him the other day. I heard a really good quote.
I just finished the book, so literally, let's get coffee. I'll give you the book.
Yeah,
check it out.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we got to go do a tour.
Yeah, I definitely want to check it out for sure.
I heard a quote. I don't know who it was because I never pay attention to the authors and stuff like that. But it was, people spend time trying to save money when they should spend money trying to save time.
Yeah, you said that to me the other day. I was like,
you're like, oh, you're like, where
I was like, that's like a proverb or something.
Steal it from the stealer. But listen,
great.
this has been awesome. Great. You've given us a tremendous amount of your time, which is doing much more important things than this podcast in terms of what you're doing for people and families and what you're trying to solve. So I just want to say thank you for that. Where do people find you? I know you mentioned Twitter a couple times. I'm not sure if you're active on there, but you can either say it to us or say it to the camera to have people follow you, your journey, your companies, or just want to reach out and maybe ask you a couple questions. We'll take us to a wrap.
At Ranjit Bindra, I think on Twitter, so I'm pretty active there, and then on LinkedIn as well, my profile, and typically can use that as a good way to get to me. Certainly email, but my Yale email, but those are probably the two easiest ways to find me, and always happy to help entrepreneurs and serve on panels because I find this stuff fascinating and really excited to be on the show. It's been great.
Awesome. And then you got your companies, Modifi Bio, Alphina, and
Cybrexa,
and one to be named shortly.
B3 Therapeutics, but stealth mode.
Okay, stealth mode. Very cool. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us for all this time. We hope you enjoyed the show. It's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Forward Obsessed. Please share this episode, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast app. This episode was hosted by Pete Senna and David Salinas from the Digital Surgeons Podcast Studio in New Haven, Connecticut. Special thanks to our AV crew, Steve Walter and Meg Olson. Forward Obsessed is produced by Robert Roach. If you'd like to contact our team, visit us at forwardobsessed.com.